Biz, where we talk about the business and marketing side of plastic surgery. I'm your host, Catherine Maley, author of Your Aesthetic Practice, What Your Patients Are Saying, as well as consultant to plastic surgeons to get them more patients as well as more profits. Now, today's distinguished guest is Dr. Robert Singer. I'm just thrilled to have him. He's a world-renowned, board-certified plastic surgeon in private practice with his own surgical center located in La Jolla, California. And if you don't know where that is, it's in San Diego, and it is gorgeous there. So that's where he has practiced for more than 40 years. So Dr. Singer is the former president and chair of the board of trustees for the Aesthetic Society. And he's a member of several international, national, and state medical societies. Now, Dr. Singer is just one of 8 plastic surgeons who have been awarded the ASERF or ASERF Career Achievement Award, and that's the most prestigious award we have in the field of plastic surgery. He's also received many awards and honors, too numerous to mention. Now, he appears regularly on radio and television programs, such as Larry King Live, and he's seen often in national and international magazines. Now, Dr. Singer's also a sought-after speaker who lectures around the world, and he's authored many scientific publications on reconstructive as well as aesthetic plastic surgery. So, Dr. Singer, it is an honor to have you as a guest here on Beauty and the Biz. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I hope I live up to that introduction.
So, I have to ask right away, how did you end up as a plastic surgeon in the most gorgeous part of our country?
Well, there's 2 parts to that. How did I end up as a plastic surgeon? Yes. I never grew up, but I got older in Buffalo, New York. And then I went from there to do my surgical training in Palo Alto at Stanford.
Yep.
And I originally wanted to become a cardiologist because my dad had a massive heart attack when I was younger. His cardiologist befriended me and was a mentor. And then as I went to medical school, I realized I had more of a surgical personality. So I actually went to Stanford to become a neurosurgeon.
Wow.
I had no exposure to plastic surgery until I was there. And after having that exposure, I realized that was the better fit for me. I like the idea that you need to know basic information about anatomy, tissue, wound healing, but it was also a little more creative. Not as much dogma as neurosurgery or cardiac surgery. And for me, it was the right fit. Actually, I got drafted out of my residency. They had a special physician draft during Vietnam. And I spent some time running the emergency room at Balboa Naval Hospital here in San Diego. And I spent some time in Vietnam and Da Nang. And when I finished that, I wanted to finish my general surgery training, and I did that in Santa Barbara, and then I looked at options, and I was fortunate enough to do my plastic surgery training in Vanderbilt in Nashville, which was a sensational program with tremendous clinical material. I looked at academia, and I had a number of offers for that. But the best advice I got was from someone who was running a program at UCLA. Said, I'll give you an academic position here, but don't follow what your mentors want you to do or your chief. Follow what you really want to do in your heart. And that was a combination of reconstructive and cosmetic and in private practice. And it was the best information that was given to me because it turned out to be the right fit for me. I had spent some time in San Diego, La Jolla as a kid when I came out and visited my relatives who lived in LA, and I used to come down with my cousins and surf here. And it's a spectacular community. It looks like a sleepy retirement community. It used to be said La Jolla was the place where retired couples went to visit their parents, but it's a very dynamic place. It's a biotech center, one of the biotech centers of the world. And it's a great place to travel from and always come back to. So for me, it worked out very well. and I've been involved in plastic surgical organizations and in education and educating the public since then. And although I was in private practice for many, many years, I've now joined an MSO group. It's a number of practices, physicians, we own a number of spas, and we'll be looking at additional practices with the idea that aggregation of practices in today's world of business climate and everything else, I think is more of the future.
How interesting is that? Let's talk about that then, because one question I always ask the doctors is, how do you get into this industry? And in 40 years ago, you pretty much came in through the hospitals or, through your reconstructive work. But when you're cosmetic, you have to hit the ground running. And do you open a solo practice? Do you join somebody else's practice? So where do you think that's all going?
Those are very interesting questions that everybody has to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fortunate because I had a great background in reconstructive. When I came to San Diego, I ran to 13 different emergency rooms. You couldn't do that today because of the traffic. And that helped me build up a clientele of patients from offering good service, not cutting corners, and primarily emphasizing safety. And that eventually built up an elective practice where a lot of the patients that I had operated on as trauma or in the hospital either came in for aesthetic procedures or referred friends. But there was no shortcut. It was a lot of hard work, and it is still a lot of hard work. The best referral sources were patients who had had good results previously.
Mm-hmm. So, sorry, my dog wants to hear every word you're saying. He's very interested.
You know what? I love seeing your dog. He can interrupt us anytime he wants.
Oh, he will. I'd love to hear about this management corporation you're developing, or LLC, whatever it is. What is the intent? What does the structure look like?
It's really an aggregation of different practices, so individuals can practice their own way, but it has the economy of scale with regard to purchasing supplies, with regard to marketing, and with regard to a concept and an ethic and a branding of producing the highest level of care from the best trained individuals. That's the concept of it, and so far it's been proven to be successful. It's good. It's different from the models of the derm and orthopedics have had of buying up practices and fitting it into a corporate model where it's sort of like a franchise, and you have to have a square peg fit into a square hole. This is different, but it gives guidance for those good physicians. As I say, we've been growing. We're in the process of purchasing a couple practices up north, but I still practice the way I practiced before with my own staff. I have a Quad A approved ambulatory surgical facility that's right on the grounds of Scripps Memorial in the hospital. But patients often don't want to go in the hospital because of COVID, today's situation. So we're an accredited facility with anesthesiologists and a number of the physicians in the community who don't have that, who can't operate in the hospital today because the hospital won't do elective surgery, or the ASCs have shut down, have called and said, can we use your operating rooms? So I think that's a model for success for the future. One of the things I've always felt, if you want to see the future, help create it. Yeah, you have to make your own decisions to assure yourself what are the fewest problems that are going to rise in the future, and how do you avoid those? It's planning, and it's a lot of work.
Okay, so if you can't go through the hospitals anymore like you used to, running ER to ER, and running a solo practice, like what would you recommend somebody do if they were entering the marketplace now? do they go solo? Do they join a partner or become a partner? Do they just become an employee? Do you have any, what words of wisdom do you tell those coming out, or even those who are kind of running ragged and burnt out from all of this and maybe want to do something different? Do you have advice that you give them?
Well, if I was coming out of a residency or fellowship, I would look at a number of things. Where do I want to live? What's ultimately going to make me happy? What's going to make, if you have a significant other and you're lucky enough to have one that's a good partner, what's going to make that person happy as well? And you're going to make a living wherever you go. You just have to be realistic. If you come into certain marketplaces, it may be more difficult. It may take you longer. You have to be sensible. You don't want to get in the hole financially because you've already probably come out with loans already. The idea of coming out and thinking you're going to be the most important sought after aesthetic surgeon in the community when you've just come out of a residency is just pure fantasy. It's going to take time. It's going to take work. In today's marketplace, I would not go into solo practice alone. I wouldn't try to build that. You're an unknown, and if you have very aggressive marketing, you may have a meteoric rise and a very fast collapse. There's no shortcut. I would see if I could join someone. You know nothing about business coming out of a residency and fellowship, and it's better to learn on somebody else's dime,
Right.
and learn the basics of training, of running a practice, of what it takes as far as personnel. So I would join somebody if I could. In the past, most people in the aesthetic society were solo practitioners of aesthetic. Most people in ASPS are either in academia or have joined groups. They're no longer in solo practice. I think that and one of the reasons in selling my practice after many years and looking at an exit strategy was I wanted to stay involved. I wanted to continue to teach. I wanted to have the interaction with my staff and patients. But I didn't want necessarily all of the pressures that existed. So for me, this MSO group was reasonable. But that's different from somebody coming in. That may be an option for someone coming into an entity like that. But I would look at opportunities to join someone, realizing it's not easy. And if you join someone, you think you're worth more than they do.
Right.
And you have to have a niche that you're bringing. What is it that you're bringing to that practice that's going to be added value? And the individual who's running the practice has built it up for a long time. They've built up the image. They've done all the things. So you're not going to come in as an equal partner. And no matter what they're offering you, it's more than they want to.
Right.
And it's not enough for what you want. So you have to be realistic about that. Talk to consultants. Talk to someone like you. Get information before you go in. And if you're going to start a practice, if it's a solo practice or join someone, get good consultants. Realize that a lot of consultants are more interested in their pocket than yours. But there are good consultants, practice management consultants. You need a good attorney. You need a good CPA. You need advice as far as marketing. And you can't do that by yourself. So those are a lot of things you need to think about before you enter into a practice. And you have to look at, ultimately, how long will it take me to make a living? You don't want to just incur debt that you're going to then start making bad decisions to satisfy that debt. You don't want to get behind the 8 ball of debt.
Well, I've seen some of the practices, there's either those that grow and they listen to the marketplace and they get this huge team going. They have their own surgery center, they have a hair transplant division, they have skincare, full med spa, and now their overhead is unbelievable. They've got a staff of 30 to 50. Then there's the other kind that say, no, I'm going back to my wife, my surgical assistant, and my receptionist. How do you feel about that?
I think different practices have to run different ways. And, I've had estheticians in my practice. We now have within this MSO a couple of spas that are outside of the practice. I think that the model has to be what you're comfortable with and what's realistic in your community. What works in La Jolla won't work in North Dakota, won't work in New York or in Miami. So there are different models. I know a lot of individuals who had very grandiose ideas, built monuments for themselves with a lot of space, and they're just paying a lot of rent. And in a downturn, they don't survive. A lot who had large spas, the success of spas is like the success of new restaurants. The fatality rate is huge. Now, there's a role for it, but you just have to be realistic and you have to be a business person. Unfortunately, coming out of training programs, you know very little about business. Successful practices are running successful businesses, and you need help in doing that.
All right. I know quite a few surgeons who have gone back and gotten an MBA. And I have an MBA, and frankly, I can tell you everything you need to know in 2 days. You don't need a 4-year evening program to do that. But business is business. And what's funny is we all think our business is different, but business is business. You have revenues, you have liabilities, you have assets. It's all the same.
And teaching practice management courses for years, originally with Gus Cologne, who unfortunately passed away, prior president of the Aesthetic Society, with Mark Jolla, with Mike Edwards. We talk about basics, and that is that business practices run across every arena. They're not unique to plastic surgery, and sensible business practices are successful, and fads come and go. But, you have to look at expenditures, you have to look at bottom line, you have to look at new expenditures, what makes sense, you have to look at personnel, you need to have a good HR consultant. All of those things are just not natural. They take a lot of time and effort and work. Running an individual practice is not easy, and it's certainly not easy with regulations of labor in California.
Oh, California, for sure. Let's talk about personnel, hiring staff, and not just hiring them, but finding the right A players, motivating them, training them. You must have been through quite a few staff in your 40 years. So what kind of tidbits of information or pieces of pearls that you could give us for hiring, motivating, keeping them happy, and keeping them put? Because staff turnover will really hurt your bottom line.
Absolutely. You lose institutional memory. Most of my staff that I've had through the years have stayed with me a long time. I had a patient coordinator who was with me 25 years before she retired and went back to her family in Texas. I've had scrub nurses who were with me over 20 years. So if you can ideally have staff that are long-term, that in itself has some issues because they become fiefdoms, you have prima donnas, you want to avoid that. You're only as good as your staff. So I would say you need to be very careful in hiring. I never hire someone on the first time. I have multiple interviews, and I have my other staff interview them also because they have to be compatible and fit in with the group. You need to know, what are their motivations? What do they plan to do in a couple of years from now? Which gives you an insight. Are they going to be staying with you? You need to hire. You can teach a lot of basics of the information about surgery, but you can't teach personality. Looking at somebody who's a great nurse in the hospital may fit in an OR, but are they going to fit in with taking care of the patients? Are they going to fit in the coordination with the front staff? I would rather have somebody in my front office, rather than coming from a medical background, I would rather have them having been trained by Four Seasons or Neiman Marcus as a premier shopper. That's the type of mentality. To me, it's all about how would I want a member of my family or myself treated? And if it's not good enough for them, it's not good enough for the patient. So that mentality of service is key. And that's whether I'm doing a favor for somebody referred in from the barrio, or it's somebody from royalty and I've operated on kings and queens and royalty. Everybody should be treated as royalty. That's the most important thing you can do, is take care of that person. And I told my staff, I'm not the most important person. And it's not the next call. It's the person you're talking to at that moment. That's the most important person. I learned this from the CEO of one of the famous hotel chains in India. And essentially, he said, it's not about you. It's not about the company. It's about the client first. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the mentality that we want here. So interviewing, then doing background checks on everyone who comes in, and realize everybody looks good on a resume, and you don't really know what you're getting until they're there. Sometimes it's sort of a crapshoot, and you don't know what you're getting, and then reality comes into play. And it's tougher today because the same motivation that existed as far as work ethic, I'm sorry, doesn't exist for a lot of people out there. People think nothing about going from company to company today. That's a result of what we see in the biotech world and in the .com world. So it's a different world out there, but you want to screen carefully, and then you want to reward your staff. You want to keep them long term. I've learned a long time ago that you criticize in private, but you praise in public. You make sure that they feel special, that they feel part of the team. You're working with them. They're not working for you. I have an open communication, and anytime they have an issue, they can come in, we can talk about it, and you want to solve the problem then. You don't want to let it fester. So we have frequent office meetings, and anybody can say, there's an issue, let's meet, and we'll do that. And that requires also, a good office manager and a good HR policy, all written out, and you follow that. Don't cut corners. And, if you're growing, there's profits, you need to share some of that so they feel a vested interest in the practice.
Let's talk about that for a second, because that's coming up a lot. I do a lot of HR for practices. I'm really good at finding people, but like you said, some people are professional interviewers, I think, and then they get on board and they need about a month before they show their true colors, and then you've got a bad hire. But let's say you have a good hire. I'm hearing over and over and over, what's the incentive here? Like, what's your commission plan? How do you feel about that, commissioning people? And I know there's some fee splitting issues in our industry, but if that new group feels like they're only gonna do more when they're paid more, you probably don't have the right person anyway. But how do you handle that? Make them feel special, but also reward them because they know you're bringing in some money here.
Okay, first you need to look. What's the going rates for good people in your community, and it's different. You can't be cheap and expect to find the best people. The other aspect is there are different philosophies about commissions. I personally don't work in my office on a commission basis for anyone because it's a team approach. If you have an esthetician, they're selling the product, what happens if the person in the front is selling the product? What happens if the patient coordinator is doing that? There are different models. I'm just telling you, that's not a model I like. I like the idea that if there's success, there's a shared pool, and then at the end of the year or whenever you decide, on a quarterly basis or whatever you decide, you can share that among everyone. They don't all get the same percentage depending on what they do and their job, but there's an incentive for them if they do a good job. That way, it's a team approach. I know that the other model works for some. That's fine. As we talked before we came on, different chefs cook different way and they still have good meals. So the model that works for me won't necessarily work for Dr. X or Dr. Y. They have to find a model that works for them to retain their staff. As far as what you alluded to about bad hires, you have a honeymoon period. You're going to have some idea. So I would never hire somebody on a full-time basis until they've had a 3-month trial period. And at that point, you can make a better determination. You're going to have an idea well before that, but you don't know what you get until they're really there. And if they don't fit, if they're a bad fit, don't try to change it. And you need to educate them. Nobody's going to come in knowing everything. They're not going to get it by osmosis. You want to hire people with the idea you want them to succeed, not fail. So that requires a lot of ongoing education within the staff, from other staff, and from you. And you can't expect staff to behave in a certain manner if you don't. You set the example, and they're going to follow that. But if you have somebody who's really doesn't fit, get rid of them because they become toxic to everyone. You don't want factions in the office. You don't want gossip in the back room. You need to function as a team.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with everything except an end of the year reward system. In today's world, I think that's too long. I don't think people will stay motivated with that. So I personally, although I came from a strong sales background, so I was only paid if I sold something. So I have that mindset. But I would recommend do it quarterly and or monthly, or have fun little contests throughout the month. But because you're trying to keep people engaged, I would just throw that in there.
I thoroughly agree with that. That's why I said some will do it on a quarterly basis. Mm-hmm. I think that the reward at the end of the year, some years aren't very good. So I think that you need something ongoing to continue to motivate and keep people happy.
Well, they say, now.
And there's also, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are also other value-added benefits. You can give, skincare. You can provide fillers and Botox. My staff had gotten surgery after a certain period of time. Mm-hmm. And whatever that arrangement is, you need to set that out in policy so it's not different from one person to the other. And they have to understand, is that going to be in lieu of a bonus or a mm-hmm. merit raise? Is that going to be, are they paying for OR and supplies? There's no right and wrong. Mm-hmm. It's just you have to decide and then follow that for everyone.
Absolutely. The fairness is a big deal in a practice. Regarding business mistakes, could you just give us like one or two business mistakes that you made either with staff or business equipment or overhead or whatever that could help the audience, not make those same mistakes?
I think every office has probably looked at some technology and lasers that are now hat racks or something else in the back room. So buying new equipment, I think that you need to look very carefully at, I would say, lease rather than buy if you can. Look at the maintenance. Look at what the cost is. Look at what's realistic of how many cases you need to do to justify buying that. What is going to be the cost structure of that? And realize you can't buy everything. Nobody can afford everything. So you need to be selective of, does it fill a niche? If you're, the first in the area and it's something productive, that's great. If you're the 50th, it becomes a commodity. It's different and your pricing is different. So looking back at some of those, I would do things differently as I've learned more about business. I've surrounded myself with, most of my friends are not in medicine. Most of my friends run Fortune 500 companies or biotech companies. So I've learned from that and realized that business is fairly similar. The principles of learning about business, you need to educate yourself with. One of the other things, looking back, is I suffered from success. I've been busy. I've been fortunate. I made some good decisions. I think that what basically made the reputation the way it is today is because I always I didn't cut corners, and I always emphasized what's the best approach to safety for the patient. Also, promise less and deliver more. Don't overpromise. So those are the things that were the good things. The thing that was, as I started to say, that I suffered from success is I didn't understand and get into social media as much as I should have, or if I was starting, or if I was in the middle of a practice. In today's world, although I have all sorts of issues with social media, that there's no filter and there's so much misinformation. You used to get a patient who came in for a consult, you educated them, they started at 0, you brought them up to here. Now they're starting at -30. It takes a lot of effort because of the misinformation on social media to bring them up to 0. But I don't think you can survive in today's world economically without having a social media presence. And you need appropriate people to handle that. I'm not sure everybody has the time or the ability to handle their own. You need to be able to handle the message and make sure what goes out is what you want to say. But I find that having professional people do that, PR people, practice management people, website management is key to doing that. I would have done a lot more of that earlier than I did.
Well, talking about marketing, just in our general industry, 40 years ago, you weren't even allowed to market. And then the best you could do is maybe a yellow page ad. And then when I came on board 21 years ago, definitely the reggae were, or the rebels were advertising, but very looked down on. Boy, it was not popular. How did you handle marketing as the decades went on? What did you jump into? Because I know you've done a ton of PR, and I know that doesn't just happen. You usually are doing something like paying a PR agency. But how did you handle all of the aspects? You can do magazines, TV, radio. How did you handle the marketing early on?
I looked at what existed in the community. How could I make my community better? What were the things that interested in me that I could become involved in? So it was a matter of speaking to groups. It was a matter of being on boards. It was a matter of being philanthropic. And that wasn't for marketing. I did that because it made my life better. It made my community better, and things I believed in. And that had its own rewards. Being involved in things like the symphony, being involved in things like the museums, being involved in animal welfare and the zoos, interacting with individuals who were in the demographics that wanted aesthetic surgery, wanted to look better. It gave me an entree to that. It wasn't paid advertising. It had its own benefits. It took time, it took effort, and it took money. But it wasn't because I was doing it for marketing. Today, if I came in and I started practice, I'm not sure you could do all of those things and be successful. You need to have professional marketing today.
I know up here in San Francisco, we had Bruno Risto and Jack Owsley. And they were very famous plastic surgeons here in San Francisco, and they hung around with the high society group. And they had wives who were very involved in philanthropic efforts, and that's how they built everything. But then I realized, what's that?
I haven't heard from Bruno for about a week,
and
you're right. They were very involved in the higher society of the city. They were involved in the fine arts.
Yep.
They were involved in a lot of things. On boards, and they gave back a lot.
Yep.
I'm fortunate to have a spectacular better two-thirds my wife, and she helped oversaw and got the downtown public library in San Diego built after 30 years of them mucking around with it. She was chair or president of the San Diego Zoo Foundation. She's president of the Diane Fossey International Gorilla Foundation. So she's been involved in a lot of named entities, but also a lot of small charities that you never hear of that really need the money and need the support. So you can't expect to get that clientele if you don't interact with that clientele.
Right.
But I would also say you don't ever want to be out there hawking surgery and marketing at those events. You want to create an ambiance of trust, of being a respectable individual, providing appropriate information. That's what made my practice. It may be different for somebody else. Mine wasn't glitz. Mm-hmm. And that's still what I believe in. So it was a lot of hard work, and we're still involved in a lot of things in the community. But if you look at not only San Francisco, you look at New York, you look at Dan Baker, Sherelle Aspen, they were involved in the community. They're involved in society. Mm-hmm. But, not everybody has to play at that level.
Right.
You have to decide what is the image you want of your practice. You can't be everything to everyone. You can either be, Harry Winston, Neiman Marcus, or you can be Costco. You can't be both. Mm-hmm. Decide and then fashion it that way. But if you're going to try to be at that higher end, you need to provide a better service. You need to provide something that distinguishes you from everybody else who wants to play in that arena.
So regarding marketing, how much has it's changed completely, but what kind of marketing would you do in today's world, that you wouldn't have done before? But like you had mentioned social media, if you think about it, it's still going to be time. You guys used to spend all of your evenings at symphonies and parties and, doing all the cultural events. So it's done is shifted. Now you're spending your evenings in front of a camera trying to make videos, But how do you feel, what's going on with marketing in you and in today's world? How do you think it should be done, or what do you think makes most sense?
I'm at a different point in my career. If it depends if you're starting practice, you're in the middle of a practice, or you're at the tail end of the practice, how you approach things. And it's not the same for each one of those. But I would look to good consultants. I'm not a PR expert. I'm not a media star.
Yes, you are. You used to be.
Well, I when I lecture to plastic surgeons finishing their residency, and I explain to them, or in the middle of their practice, you're not. And I've been on a lot of red carpets, but mm-hmm. you're not a rock idol. Don't start believing your own PR. Mm-hmm. You're a profession. You're offering a service. The reality is you're a glorified tailor. You do piecework. Don't get carried away with who and what you are. Realize that, and then get good input from professionals. Get somebody who can give you guidance in PR. What's the niche that you can fit into in your community? You need obviously a good website. You need some social media presence. And you need to keep learning. You need to go to meetings. You need to take teaching courses. You need to take symposia on marketing, on business management. Once you stop learning, you might as well quit. Yeah. You need to continue to adapt because it's an evolving marketplace. And what worked for you 5 years ago isn't going to work for you today. So you need to continue to look at what's current, how do you fit in, what's comfortable for you, what fits in with your image and your personality. Because what might be right for somebody in San Francisco, the next person in San Francisco to say, I find that repugnant, I wouldn't do that. Right. One of the hard things for us as members of the Aesthetic Society, board certified plastic surgeons, is you have to maintain ethics. Right. And not everybody out there follows that or has to do that. But once you compromise that, there's no coming back. So maintain your ethics.
Have you looked at your numbers, though? Because here's where I run into trouble with social media. When I consult with a practice, I get very factual and I'm data driven. So when we look at those numbers and we pull revenues by referral source, do those numbers equate to the time and effort you're putting into that referral source? So your practice, like it's a very mature practice, I would think most of it is word of mouth. And frankly, any practice that's been around for at least 15 years, I would hope the majority is word of mouth. But social media should be more like a fun thing you do just because you're kind of bored, But I haven't seen the numbers prove that that's where all your eggs should go. I just haven't.
Oh, you're absolutely right. The better patients of mine are coming from, or patients
Right.
I've operated on before, or referrals. They're not through marketing or social media. Most of my marketing, I've done a lot of marketing, but most of it's internal marketing
Right.
in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need to look at data. I've always believed data was king or queen, and you can get that data with KOIs, other things through things like ANN, the Aesthetic Neural Network of the Aesthetic Society, through ANZU. But if you don't have that data and you don't look at the data, having the data, bad data in is bad data out.
Right.
But if you don't analyze your data, why bother accumulating or getting it? So there are good programs, as I say, like the ANN program. Those things will give you key information to make valid decisions going forward on what's worthwhile, what's not. What if a patient comes in for Botox, what's the value of that patient down the road? Are they going to be converting to surgery? What's the long-term benefit? What procedures aren't really valuable? But I'm sorry. I don't think you can look at a one-time ad if you're doing that and look at the ROI on that and think that's going to be long-term, going to give you valuable data. It may be the accumulation of all of the things you do that brings your name out there. But I think you need to look at, if I'm doing a program on social media, if I'm doing an interview, if I'm doing a lecture, you need to then evaluate and see the return of that, and then make further decisions on where should I put my effort and time. And as they say, it's not a slam dunk. It takes a lot of evaluation, and if you can't evaluate it, get an expert who can for you.
Well, whenever the new people come out, they have very unusual expectations about how long it takes to grow a practice. And when I got into this, we used to always say it takes about 10 years. And in today's world, you have about 10 months. How are you handling setting expectations with new guys coming out saying, why isn't this happening for me yet? I've been at this for a year now.
It's a different world.
It really is.
When I came to San Diego and La Jolla, I was, I think, the 13th or 15th plastic surgeon here. Now, I have more plastic surgeons in my building and the building next to mine than most states have. San Francisco's like that.
Yep.
New York's like that. So you have to be realistic. If you're coming into a place, a highly sought after area with a lot of plastic surgeons, it's going to take you longer than in a place that doesn't have as many. And you can't expect, you may come out as a chief resident and you were running the show there at your residency, or you came out of a fellowship. You come out, you're an unknown entity when you come into practice.
Right.
And that's why I say coming into solo practice today, I would find very difficult, and it's not something I would do at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So you just need to look at around and see Dr. X, Y, and Z who are very successful, and they have this and they have that. You're not going to get that in 3 months. You're not going to get that in 6 months. You're not going to get that in a year. They've worked a long time to do that. Mm-hmm. But you also have to look at the people who came in with a lot of flash, who didn't survive, who aren't there anymore.
Right. I want to switch gears and go to mindset, because I hope people are hearing your growth mindset. You never stop learning. You've stayed involved in everything, like in your own community, the cultural side of your community, but also the medical society. How much have you put into that medical, or all of these medical societies, speaking and writing? Can you talk to that? How much of your life has been spent growing, you know?
For me, ongoing learning, whether it's in medicine or anything, are key. As my wife says, Robert, why do you still do this?
Right.
I mean, it's the essence. It's part of my DNA.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in giving back. There were people who were, none of us got here alone.
Yep.
People mentored me, and I feel a commitment to doing that. Plus, it keeps you fresh. It keeps you learning. When I stop learning, I'm going to stop practicing. I don't do a procedure today the same way I did it 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be dramatically different, but there are nuances. And that comes from attending meetings, symposium, talking to peers. I've done a lot of that. I'm constantly involved in running panels around the world or on Zooms. Or writing papers, or I'm on the editorial board of the Aesthetic Surgery Journal. Looking at those things, I started the Emerging Trends Hot Topics Task Force for the Aesthetic Society and ASPS. That keeps me fresh. It's looking at all of the new things that are out there, and so many of the new things that are out there prove not to be better, not to be as safe, and not to be as good. So just because it's new doesn't mean that it's going to be worthwhile. But that's the assessment of that, and then fitting into what fits in my practice, what makes sense for my patients, what makes sense for my staff. I'm currently and helping oversee the Aesthetic Society COVID task force that came up with all the guidelines for safe practice and re-entering practice. And those are things that we implement. Patients want to know you're safe. And they also want to trust you. If they don't trust you, they're not going to do business with you. And they wanted safety today, especially with COVID, is absolutely critical. So you can't cut corners and you can't become complacent about that. I'm still involved in the hot topics. I still give input to quadruple ASF, and I was president of Quad A and head of their trustees for years. But I believe in safety, and now we're extending that to the International Society. And hopefully at some point they're going to require as a criteria of membership the same thing that I implemented and I pushed the Aesthetic Society and ASPS to say, if you're going to be a member of these organizations, you're going to have to either operate in an accredited or licensed facility, or you're not going to be a member. And that raised the bar of safety so much. I think that's one of the things I'm proudest of. Nice. And we're doing that now with the International Society. So it's continued education of not educating just others in the public, but educating yourself.
Excellent. And any last words of wisdom for anybody in practice? Any one piece of advice?
Yeah, don't take yourself too seriously. Realize that it's ongoing. You need to enjoy what you're doing. If you're not enjoying it, don't do it. As I say, most of my friends either are CEOs of major companies, Fortune 500 companies. Yes, I've made a nice life for myself in plastic surgery. I didn't go into this for the money. I went into this because it's something I believed in. I was fortunate to make a good living, nowhere near what my friends have made, but the quality of my life, and I look back, is much more rewarding than many of them have. Looking back at a patient who comes in 30 years later and say, oh, you did my nose. And, it made such a difference in my life of giving me confidence. It was the best decision I made. Or, I just feel so much better about myself. Patients who come in, or I see patients who came in with their mother, and their mother was going to have surgery, and they said, no way in the world would I ever do this. And, 20 years later, they come, when I said that, well, now it's time I want to do something about myself. Seeing that type of response, you look back, and sure, you get patients who are difficult. Those are the ones you remember. And it's difficult day to day satisfying all the needs and the increasing needs of patients. But, when you get somebody satisfied and comes in and thanks you, boy, that makes it all worthwhile. The greatest problem is not your competition, it's the unsatisfied patient. So don't overpromise. And there are patients I say no to that I know I can't make happy. So they're not your problem until you accept them as a patient. Once you accept them, they become yours. So you need to screen, and it's not just about getting a patient in and doing a surgery.
So true. So tell us something that we don't know about you.
Well, even though I'm not, or some would say I'm altitudinally challenged, I played a lot of team sports. I played a lot of basketball.
Really?
Competitively. I played competitive tennis. My passion is my family and travel and learning. And we spend a lot of time in Africa. I'm very proud of my wife, as I said, who was president of the Fosse Foundation. The mountain gorillas are an endangered species, one of the few that are increasing. They exist and survive because of Diane Fosse, and the Fosse Foundation have continued that. So we're involved with that. I've adopted elephant orphans. I've adopted cheetah orphans. I've adopted gorilla orphans, and we love our animals. We're involved in the Humane Society here, which has a no-kill policy, and that's made our life better. So that's a little bit about me.
That's pretty darn interesting. Thanks for sharing that. All right. So if anybody wanted to learn more about you, your website, I believe, is rsingermd.com?
Yes, rsingermd.com, and they can also go to Prime Plastic Surgery, which is now the entity that I'm involved with another plastic surgeon, and we'll have several others. As I say, I think there will always be a future for the private practitioner like Harley Street in London. But there are going to be fewer and fewer of those who can survive with the demands from regulations of government, the decreasing reimbursement. So I think that I won't say consolidation, aggregation of practices that will allow you to still practice the way you want, but will give you a little more freedom and a little more guidance and a little more help, so you don't have to do all of the things by yourself, because none of us are expert in everything. I think that's going to be more of what we're going to see.
All right.
And I think that the thing that separates plastic surgery, why I think it will still survive and there'll be a future, is the concept of innovation and quality in taking care of patients, and not just hype and spin.
Wow. Well, we shall see, won't we? But Dr. Singer, thank you so much for being on Beauty and the Biz. It is an honor to spend time with you.
It's been a pleasure. You're a real professional. I appreciate the opportunity, and if you can help practices like you do, they're way ahead.
Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining us on Beauty and the Biz. And if you would, please subscribe. And if you feel so inclined, a great review would be super helpful. And then if you've got any feedback or questions for me, just leave them at my website, catherinemaley.com, or you can always DM me at Instagram, Catherine Maley MBA. Thanks so much. Talk soon.